Easy now, easy. That feels nice, huh?
John McAllister had always dreamed of something more. His ranch, tucked away in the rolling hills of a quiet little town, was all he had left, his last piece of a dream that had once been shared with his late wife, Emily. Now, at 45, with the weight of years and worries pressing down on his broad shoulders, it felt like the ranch was slowly slipping away. He'd spent most of his life working the land, waking up before dawn and tending to his horses, but lately it seemed like the harder he worked, the further he drifted from the success he'd always imagined. The ranch wasn't much an old farmhouse, a few barns that had seen better days, and a modest herd of horses that weren't winning any ribbons at the county fairs. The land, once green and fertile, now showed signs of wear, the soil thinning and the grass struggling to grow. He wasn't breaking, but he wasn't far from it either. The bank had started sending him letters with more urgency, and he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. John's neighbors, with their sprawling farms and shiny new equipment, seemed to have figured it out. Meanwhile, his own property seemed to be slowly falling apart. At times, he wondered if it was all worth it, if maybe it was time to sell the place and walk away, start fresh somewhere else. But then, on mornings like this one, when the mist still hung low over the fields and the sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, he felt a flicker of something inside him. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe he could still turn things around. As he walked across the dirt yard toward the barn, his boots crunching the gravel, John heard a murmur of voices coming from the nearby auction. Curious, he wandered over. A local rancher was selling off an old foal barely a few weeks old, its coat a patchwork of brown and white. The foal had lost its mother, and the owner, struggling to care for it, had decided it was better off sold. John wasn't sure why, but something about that foal struck him. Maybe it was the way it stood there, looking small and fragile against the backdrop of larger, stronger horses. Or maybe it was just the last spark of hope he clung to. With little more than a handful of change in his pocket, John threw in a bid. And when the auctioneer's gavel fell, he was the proud owner of a foal for 50 cents. As the crowd scattered, some laughing, others shaking their heads, John stood there for a moment, staring at the small creature in front of him. It wasn't much, but maybe, just maybe, this was the chance he'd been waiting for. At first glance, it was clear that Sunny, the foal, was far from a miracle. She was small, skittish, and looked like she'd barely survived the first few weeks of life. John had expected a bit of a challenge, but he hadn't anticipated how difficult things would get. The little foal struggled to stand on her wobbly legs, and her coat was ragged, a patchy mix of brown and white. She looked more like a burden than a blessing. Yet, there was something in her eyes, a flicker of determination that made John feel like he couldn't just give up on her. For the first few days, John wasn't sure what to do. He'd never raised a foal before. His experience had always been with full-grown horses. He did what he knew best. He fed her, kept her warm, and tried to keep her calm, but nothing seemed to make a difference. She wouldn't drink from the bottle he tried to feed her with, and John found himself walking circles around the barn, his mind racing with worry. What if she didn't make it? What if he had just wasted his time and his money on something that would end in failure? John spent countless hours by her side, watching over her while the rest of the ranch continued to fall into disarray. The horses needed to be fed, the fences fixed, and the crops harvested. But every time John tried to focus on something else, his mind would return to Sunny. The foal needed him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that if he gave up on her now, it would be the end of everything. Maybe his ranch, maybe his dreams. There were days when he nearly gave up. The foal would lie in the corner of the barn, weak and listless, her breathing shallow. John found himself questioning whether he was being foolish, whether he was simply too attached to an animal that had no future. It would have been easier to let her go, to stop investing his time and energy into something that seemed so hopeless. But just when John was about to lose all hope, something unexpected happened. One morning, as the sun crept through the barn door, John heard the softest sound, the sound of hooves shuffling. He turned, and there was Sunny, standing on all four legs for the first time in days. Her coat had begun to shine a little, her legs were steadier, and her eyes held a quiet spark of life. It wasn't much, but it was enough to reignite the spark of hope in John's chest. As the weeks passed, John's persistence began to pay off. Sunny wasn't just surviving anymore, she was starting to thrive. Her frail, patchy coat grew thicker and shinier, and her small body slowly filled out with muscle. The once trembling foal that had been so hesitant to stand was now walking with a sense of purpose, her legs stronger with each passing day. John couldn't help but marvel at the way she moved, each step more confident than the last. But it wasn't just her physical changes that amazed him. Sunny was starting to show an unusual intelligence for her age. While most foals were skittish and unpredictable, Sunny had a calmness about her. She paid attention to John's every move, her eyes locked on him with a quiet curiosity, as if she were studying him. John had always believed horses were intelligent animals, but Sunny seemed to understand him in a way he hadn't expected. He started taking her out into the fields for short walks. At first, it was just a way to let her stretch her legs, but soon John noticed that she was far faster than any of the other horses he'd raised. As she trotted across the open pasture, her body moved with an elegant fluidity, and John could see the power in each stride. Her speed was undeniable, even for a foal. One afternoon, he decided to push her a bit further. He mounted one of his older horses, a sturdy mare named Bessie, and guided Sunny through a series of basic maneuvers. To his surprise, she responded with incredible ease. When John urged her to run, she took off with the grace of a seasoned athlete, leaving Bessie behind in the dust. John's heart skipped a beat. He had always known there was something special about Sunny, but this was something else. From that day on, John knew that Sunny wasn't just any horse. She wasn't just a lucky find. There was raw talent in her, a potential that he hadn't fully recognized before. He began working with her more intensively, teaching her the basics of riding and training. Every day, Sunny seemed to soak up the lessons like a sponge, her progress astonishing John at every turn. By the end of the month, Sunny had transformed from a weak, fragile foal into a horse with the makings of a champion. John, once full of doubts, was now full of hope. Maybe this little foal wasn't just his second chance, it might be his ticket to something greater than he'd ever imagined. The day of Sunny's first race arrived faster than John expected. Despite the excitement buzzing around the ranch, John couldn't shake the nervous feeling that had settled in his stomach. He had trained her as best as he could. But she was still so young, just barely a year old, and this was a far cry from the quiet fields she'd been running around in at home. Now, she would be up against horses that had been trained for races their entire lives. The race was being held at the county fairgrounds, a modest track with wooden bleachers and a dusty field. John wasn't sure what to expect. He'd seen races before, but he had never been involved in one. He was just a rancher, with no experience in the high-stakes world of racing. The whole thing felt foreign to him. Emma, the local trainer who had been helping him, was by his side as they saddled up Sunny. She had been confident about Sunny's potential from the beginning, but even she seemed a little tense now. "She's got the speed," Emma said, tightening the saddle on the foal. "Now it's about keeping her focused." John nodded, his hands shaking as he stroked Sunny's smooth coat. She stood tall now, her chest expanding with each breath, her eyes sharp and alert. Despite her youth, she seemed completely at ease. It was as though she understood what was about to happen. John could feel the bond between them. This wasn't just a horse he'd bought for 50 cents. This was his partner. And together, they had something to prove. As they walked out onto the track, the noise of the crowd grew louder, and John's nerves intensified. The other competitors were seasoned trainers, some of them with years of experience. Their horses were sleek, polished, and imposing. They looked like they were ready for the big leagues. And then there was Sunny, her coat still catching the sun in the early morning light, and John, wearing nothing more than an old cowboy hat and a pair of worn boots, standing by her side. They lined up at the starting gate, and the crowd's chatter began to die down. The horses pranced nervously in place, their hooves scraping against the dirt. John could hear the steady beat of his own heart in his ears. His palms were sweaty, and he wiped them on his jeans. Sunny, on the other hand, stood completely still, as if she were born to race. She tossed her head once, then locked eyes with John, her gaze steady and calm. The announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeaker, announcing the start of the race. The tension in the air was electric. John's heart raced as the gates flew open, and the horses lunged forward. Sunny was a blur of motion, her legs stretching long as she shot out of the gate with an energy John had never seen before. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. From the moment the race began, John knew something special was happening. Sonny surged forward, pulling ahead of the pack with a smooth, powerful stride. The other horses struggled to keep up, their jockeys shouting commands, but Sonny was in a league of her own. Her focus was unwavering, her movements flawless. As the race entered its final stretch, John's heart pounded in his chest. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. And then, with a burst of speed, Sonny crossed the finish line in first place, leaving the other horses trailing behind. The crowd erupted into applause, but all John could do was stare in disbelief. His little foal, the one he'd bought for 50 cents, had just won her first race, and not just any race, but a competitive one against some of the best-trained horses in the region. He jumped off the fence where he had been watching, a grin spreading across his face. Emma was right behind him, her eyes wide with excitement. "I told you," she laughed, clapping him on the back. "You've got a champion." John's legs felt weak as he walked toward Sonny, who was cooling down and breathing heavily, her eyes still bright. He wrapped his arms around her neck, his voice barely a whisper. "We did it, girl. We really did it." The win felt surreal, like a dream. But as John looked out at the cheering crowd, he realized that this wasn't just a one-time fluke. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Sonny had proven herself, not just as a racehorse, but as a living symbol of hope. She had taken John from the brink of giving up to the edge of something unimaginable. And for the first time in years, John felt the spark of excitement and possibility he had almost forgotten. Sonny's victory spread like wildfire across the county, and soon, word of the miracle foal was all anyone could talk about. John had barely wrapped up the celebration when the first call came in, an offer from a local breeder who wanted to buy Sonny. It was a tempting offer, one that promised a hefty sum, but John wasn't about to part with the horse who had changed his life. As Sonny's wins piled up, the offers continued to pour in, and John found himself navigating a world he had never imagined. Newspaper articles, television interviews, and social media buzz all followed the foal's rapid rise to fame. Local radio stations wanted interviews. Sports outlets wanted stories. People from all over the country reached out, eager to get a glimpse of the champion foal who had been bought for less than $1. John was suddenly the talk of the town. The quiet, struggling rancher was now the proud owner of one of the most talked-about horses in the racing world. Sponsors began to line up, offering big money deals in exchange for logos on Sonny's saddle and endorsements for racing equipment. Major racing venues started calling, inviting them to compete in prestigious events, and the prize money skyrocketed with each race. For the first time, John's ranch was thriving. With each race win, Sonny brought in large sums of money, not just from her victories, but from breeding deals, sponsorships, and merchandise sales. John used the windfall to rebuild his ranch, pouring money into infrastructure, equipment, and more horses. He bought up land that had once been out of reach and hired skilled workers to help him expand. His life was no longer a cycle of worry and struggle. The ranch was flourishing, and he was able to provide for himself in ways he had never dreamed possible. But as his wealth grew, so did the pressure. Everyone seemed to want a piece of Sonny, buyers, agents, and even other trainers. John found himself facing constant demands. With every offer that came in, he had to carefully weigh whether to keep Sonny and risk losing her to the business side of racing or sell her for a sum that could ensure his future and the future of his ranch. Yet despite all the offers, all the temptations, John knew one thing: Sonny was his. She was more than just a horse. She was the heartbeat of his ranch, and the bond between them was unbreakable. He wasn't just a millionaire now. He was a man who had found a second chance, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. As Sonny's fame continued to spread, so did the pressure to capitalize on her success. Offers poured in from every direction: high-profile breeders, wealthy investors, even rival trainers. Everyone saw Sonny as a golden ticket, an investment that could bring millions. The money on the table was enough to secure John's future and elevate his ranch to levels he never thought possible. But with every offer came a growing unease in John's gut. The more they talked about breeding rights, championship titles, and race contracts, the more he felt like Sonny was slipping away. She was no longer just a foal he had saved from the brink of death. She was an asset, a commodity in a world where money, not relationships, mattered most. The dilemma ate at John's conscience. On one hand, selling Sonny would bring financial security, not just for him but for his ranch and the workers who depended on him. It could set them all up for life. On the other hand, Sunny wasn't just another horse. She had been his companion through his darkest days, and the bond between them was something few could understand. To let her go, to sell her for profit, felt like betraying that bond. Emma, the trainer who had been with him from the start, understood his inner conflict. "I get it, John," she said one evening, after another lucrative offer arrived. "But remember, you're not just a rancher anymore. You're a businessman. And sometimes, business means making hard choices." John wrestled with the decision. The ranch needed the money, but at what cost? Could he really sell Sunny, knowing it might hurt her future, even if it promised him everything he'd ever dreamed of? The line between protecting his dreams and protecting the animal he loved was growing thinner by the day. Years had passed since the day John McAllister had bought Sunny for 50 cents, and as he stood at the edge of his ranch, overlooking the land that had once felt like a dying dream, he couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. The rolling hills, once barren and neglected, now gleamed with the vibrant green of thriving pastures. The barns, meticulously rebuilt, housed not just a few horses, but a growing herd of prized animals, each one part of the success that had blossomed from one small foal's unlikely rise to fame. Sunny, now a seasoned racehorse in her prime, stood quietly in the pasture, her coat shining in the late afternoon sun. John watched her from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. The foal he had nursed back to health, the one he'd once feared might not survive, had become a living legend. Her offspring had carried on her legacy, and his ranch had become a beacon of success. But what mattered most to John wasn't the millions he'd earned or the sponsorship deals that still flooded his mailbox. It was the life he had built with her by his side. The ethical dilemmas, the constant balancing act between business and loyalty, had tested him more than he could have imagined. But in the end, John had made the decision to keep Sunny at his ranch, to let her live out her days in peace, surrounded by the land they had fought so hard to save. She had given him everything: hope, purpose, and the chance to rebuild his life, and he would never let her go. John had learned that success wasn't just about wealth, it was about staying true to the things that mattered most. He could have sold Sunny, taken the money, and walked away from the ranch, but that wouldn't have been the life he wanted. His bond with her had become a reminder that true fulfillment came not from what you had, but from what you were willing to protect and nurture. As the sun dipped below the horizon, John smiled to himself. The ranch was more than just a place now. It was a legacy, a second chance, and it had all started with a little foal, bought for 50 cents, who had made him a millionaire in ways money could never measure.